So the first thing I want you to do, even though you would do this at all these other events, give us the 2 or 3 minute elevator speech on, but go back a little bit farther. So you're the mayor, we get that part, obviously. You've been the mayor for 10 years now, right? Let's start back to, I don't know everybody knows that you grew up here and sort of where you went to high school and college and how you ended up where you are. So give us a little background on that.
Okay. Who was born in Orlando? Yeah, that's a pretty good number, a pretty good percentage. I was born in Orange Memorial Hospital more than 50 years ago, and grew up in Kissimmee when there were only about 10,000 people in Osceola County. There were 5,000 in Kissimmee and 3,500 in St. Cloud. Then Disney got there and it grew a little bit. I went to Brown University, got a civil engineering degree, and worked as an engineer for 4 years and saved enough money to put myself through law school at the University of Florida. And I always intended to come back to Orlando. I met my wife, Karen, in law school, and we had a small debate about maybe going to Tampa or maybe going to Atlanta, but settled on Orlando, which was good fortune for me and for her, I think. I ran for the legislature in 1992 and was fortunate enough to be elected to the state senate, where I served for 10 years and was the Democratic leader for a number of years there. I ran for Attorney General against a guy named Charlie Crist, and our motto was, as long as our gubernatorial candidate didn't lose by more than 10, we would win the race. Unfortunately, our gubernatorial candidate lost by 16, and we lost by 4. So the model was right, just the performance was not. So at that point, Bob Graham was going to run for president, and he asked me to come to D.C. to be his general counsel. So I was all prepared to do that before returning back to private law practice. I forgot to mention I was practicing law this whole time too. And Mayor Hood was in her 3rd term and was appointed Secretary of State, and they called a special election. I had never ever been in City Hall before that time. Really? I had never set foot in City Hall. And I had never, I mean, being mayor of Orlando was nowhere on my radar screen. So people started calling and saying, you need to do this, you really need to think about it. So I started thinking about it a little bit, talked it over with my family, and probably the final thing that put me over the top was Pastor Sam Green, who's the pastor of the largest AME church on the west side, called me at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they had just concluded an early morning prayer session. And he said, we prayed about it, and you have to run for this. The only person that can unite both the east side of Orlando and the west side of Orlando. You can travel in all the different circles. You represented the west side. And I had a great advantage because I had just spent, $5 million in TV advertising across the state, and I had represented 90% of the city of Orlando in the state senate. So my name recognition was far greater than the other 7. There were 7 other candidates in the race at that time. And the fortunate thing was, because there were 7 in the course of the debates that we had for the first 3 weeks, it ended up being a 3-week race. I got in between Christmas and New Year's, and then the first primary was like the 21st of January or something. But I had a lot to learn about city government and urban planning and everything like that. But when we had debates, there were 8 of us, so you only got about 30 seconds worth of time. So I got the 3 weeks to really learn about the city and learn about issues. And I had the good fortune of finishing first in the primary and then winning the race. It's been a great 10 years. And the interesting thing was, Craig, you'll probably remember this, I had an 8-point platform, but I was the only one of the candidates that was talking about revitalizing downtown.
So the interesting thing, probably the first time we spoke after you got elected, we were talking about something else, but Mayor Dyer said, Craig, I think I'm a new urbanist. And I said, I think you are too. But you got coached up very quickly, sort of on the idea. You said, my goodness, I live in College Park and I love it, and this is sort of where the future is and all this different stuff. And so one of the things that I would tell you about that doesn't come out necessarily in politics, you don't see, when you're seeing city council or whatever. That's not how government really works. It's how it governs itself. But behind that, there's all kind of briefings, and you're working with. So the mayor is a tremendously quick study on anything that we talk about. As you say, you came in sort of from the outside and have really learned a lot of different things we talk about. So that's actually very satisfying as a developer. We go in to the mayor and his staff and we talk about something like Creative Village, or we pitch certain ideas. We talk about planning and urbanism and all this different stuff. And it's very well received at the city level. That's not true at every other government, but the city is very receptive to that. I want to go ahead and talk about, since you talked about it at the State of the City the other day. At the end of the State of the City, for y'all didn't see it, Mayor Dyer stood up with his family and talked about deciding not to run for governor and being committed to everything that we're working on in Orlando. So what went on, what really went into that thought process, and what were the pros and cons, or how did you arrive at your decision?
Well, it would be a natural thing to look at running for governor, and just like when I decided to run for mayor, I had a lot of encouragement to run for governor. Obviously, you don't think it's hard about it if you have a popular governor, and right now we have a very unpopular governor who has probably the lowest approval ratings of any governor in the United States. So a lot of people think that's an easy race to win. I don't think it's going to be as easy as a lot of people think, given the nature of the money that's involved. But what I really thought about was, do I want to spend the next 2 years on the campaign trail and maybe win, maybe not? I think I'd have a good chance of winning, but maybe not. Or do I want to finish all the great stuff that we've started here? We've got a performing arts center that will be finished next year. Sunrail will open next year. We're working on the design of the Citrus Bowl, which we'll begin construction on. Little soccer stadium we're trying to get done, finishing the medical city and everything ancillary to that, the Creative Village. So I just kind of feel like there's a lot of unfinished business, and not to say anything bad about anybody that might someday run for mayor. I just don't feel like right now that there's somebody that I would trust to pick up the lance and continue on. So I kind of feel honored bound to finish what I started.
The way that a lot of this stuff works even in the region, because Orlando sets the tone obviously for the region. So this is sort of political will. Things that happen, Sunrail is a real good example of it. Medical City is another example. Everybody wants those things, right? I mean, there's not a city in America now that hasn't gotten a memo about redeveloping their downtown and transit and all these things. I mean, everybody's clamoring for the same thing. So in some ways, your advantage really becomes your mayor and the political will that mayor has, and really, frankly, then the relationships that mayor can foster. So we've got a real advantage in Orlando. I think most people know this, but especially with relationship with our congressmen and whatnot, and I think we sort of been able to do things. So that's been interesting for me to observe. I didn't know, before I got into some of these bigger projects, I didn't know how the federal government is a huge funder of local government. And the idea that you just, as a local municipality, collect your property taxes and keep on going is really not true at all. We are dependent on the federal government, transit and otherwise, for a lot of things. And a lot of stuff you see, the city doesn't even control, roads and stuff. We have nothing, I-4, other than getting to work with them on the design. We don't really control any of that stuff. So that's been an interesting thing to observe. But so I think the story of how we work with those different folks is important to talk about. So I think that's, and you talked about being able to reach, sort of across aisles and work with whatever. So tell me something about that. I know you work with Micah and Corrine Brown, and it does seem that your relationship with Governor Scott is better. So talk about some of those relationships, and how you work with really any party, anybody. Well,
whether setting out to do it or not, I think that our community in our region partners and collaborates better than just about anywhere. And a lot of the media and a lot of the, just a lot of people don't realize what we have going on here, and it's not happening everywhere. So we were kind of lucky in that regard, but I've always believed in the power of partnership, and that you can achieve stuff, more things working together than if you're doing it independently. But it's not that easy. It's a lot easier just to decide to do something by yourself and go do it, because you don't have to lead and convince others that it's a good idea, that you collect everybody together. But we've been able to do that, and I think that's the culture in our community. And I can't think of anything we'll talk about today that doesn't involve partnership and collaboration, either between local governments or between the business community and local government, or with the university or our arts groups.
Right.
So I just think that's a very important and fairly unique aspect about it.
You told me a month or two ago, one thing that Mayor Dyer and I talk about often is we talk about other cities, or we talk about other things that people are doing. And he knows a lot of the other mayors through the Conference of Mayors and whatnot. So you talked about, like, in a governor and city mayor example, in New Jersey, there's a great example of Mayor Booker in Newark and then Governor Christie. They work well together, and they are politically opposite. Yeah, they are. They are pretty much politically opposite, but they work together a lot. And so, I mean, I think what we've learned is we've got to figure out how to do that, right? With Governor Scott, no matter what you sort of think about
the entire time that I've been mayor, we've had a Republican county mayor, both Crotty and Mayor Jacobs,
right,
and we've had 3 Republican governors. So, by necessity, you have to work with people. And, you know, I learned that in the legislature back when I was in the legislature a long time ago. We used to work across party lines. When Tony Jennings was the Senate president, she appointed me a committee chair. So I was a Democrat committee chair in a Republican administration. But I also think if you took her voting record and my voting record and took the values of growing up in Central Florida, you wouldn't find much difference between her record and mine.